This is an old story, something that happened to me almost 20 years ago when I was 25. I was writing for a popular travel guidebook series and mainly worked in Central and Eastern Europe. Depending on the time of year, I could be gone for several weeks or even several months at a time. I mainly travelled alone. I'd run into a few problems here and there, but my experiences were mainly positive. One time, I was travelling on a train visit to the Czech Republic, travelling over the border. It was a long journey, so I broke it up into several overnight stops, making each leg around 8 hours. It was late January and bitterly cold. There was probably a good 7 inches of snow on the ground, perhaps more in some places. I was exhausted and battling the remnants of a flu I'd picked up. I bought my ticket in the travel centre at the train station. When I boarded the train, about half the compartments were empty, but there were definitely other people on it. Since the train wasn't crowded, I managed to find a compartment to myself, so I spread out a bit and prepared for the long ride. The first part of the ride was smooth. I worked on some guidebook stuff, wrote in my journal. A few hours into the ride, we passed over the Hungarian border, and this is where things started to get uncomfortable. I heard them before I saw them. They were a group of teen boys, about 5 of them that I could see, and they were so loud. I could hear them running through the train car, laughing and cursing and banging on the compartment walls. They were loud and obnoxious, but it's not the first time I'd ever been annoyed by a group of teenagers. I kept working, but as time went on, they grew louder and louder. As they ran from car to car, they slid the train doors open with so much force that it shook the train car, and the sounds got louder. That's when I noticed they were standing outside my compartment, looking at me. I could only see 3 of them through the small window, but there were definitely more. I'd seen them earlier. I glanced at them and then looked away. I learned the best way to deal with that kind of thing was to ignore them. I didn't want to encourage their behaviour, but ignoring them seemed to have the opposite effect. They hollered at me, "Come have fun." My compartment door was closed, but they proceeded to mess with me by slowly opening it, pretending they were going to come in, and then shutting it again. It went from chanting "girl, girl" to much more obnoxious behaviour and words, followed by a bunch of slang words for female body parts. At this point, I grew very nervous. How was I to know whether they were just messing around with me or being serious? I couldn't exactly leave to do so, which would mean walking through them. They were blocking my exit and entrance. And then one pulled out a pocket knife. He stuck out his tongue and ran the blade across it, and then pointed it at me, grinning. I tried not to show any emotion, but in my mind I was quickly taking stock of what items I absolutely had to take with me if I made a break for it. My lack of reaction angered the one holding the pocket knife, so he switched from licking it to using it to cut a hole in the seat near to him. Part of me figured they couldn't really do anything. There were other people in the train car, and they'd hear me scream. Surely someone would come and help me. The conductor hadn't passed through yet, so I figured I only had to get through the next few minutes. It was at this point I noticed the curtain on the door window. I know it sounds crazy, but that's when I lost it. I'd left the curtain open so the people walking by could see that the compartment was occupied. But now all I could think is if they came in, all they'd have to do was pull the curtain and nobody walking past would see what they were doing. At least one of them had a pocket knife. They were all taller and bigger than me, and they outnumbered me. I'm 4'10" and weighed about 98 pounds at the time. I started to really panic. My bag was in my lap, and the only other things I had in there to defend myself were a fingernail file and a butter knife. I reached into my bag and fumbled around until I had one in each hand. One of the boys opened the door, and the first guy stepped inside. Then another voice filled the corridor. I didn't need to speak the language to hear the anger. The boys all ran from my compartment, one of them dropping the pocket knife, and I watched as a middle-aged man dressed in blue stomped after them. A few seconds later, the train came to a grinding stop. The world outside was creepy, and all I could see was snow and blackness. There were no lights in sight. After a few seconds, the train started back again. The boys didn't return. I was just starting to feel some relief when the man in blue returned to my compartment. He was the conductor. "English?" he asked, and I nodded. I made them leave. "They're gone." I thanked him, and he came into my compartment and sat down across from me. It felt good having another adult in there. I felt safer. Once he was gone, I gathered my backpack and headed to the bathroom. I had to pass the other compartments as I walked down the corridor, and it was at that moment I realised I'd been wrong. There were no other riders in the other compartments. They'd all left at some point. I was the only person in my car. If the guys had come in and attacked me, then nobody would have heard me scream, and I'd have been on my own. I cried for 5 solid minutes after realising that, and I made sure to book future trips during the day. I'm a French student. I'm 22 years old, and this happened to me a few months ago. I was heading to my apartment after seeing a friend. I took the tramway home because I didn't feel comfortable walking at night. It was 11:30 p.m. As soon as I sat down, a man who was already sitting 5 or 6 seats down moved and sat in front of me. I had a very strange feeling about it, and I sent a text message to my boyfriend. The journey lasted a few minutes. When I stood up to get off the tram, the man quickly jumped out of his seat and followed me. There were several other exits he could have used, but he chose to proceed in my direction. After I departed the tram, the man was following me. Not walking behind me, but next to me. I was getting very anxious. Something felt wrong. I continued to walk faster. I crossed the road and he stayed on the other side. I thought it was over, but a few seconds later he crossed the road and was walking behind me quickly. He passed me and was walking ahead, so I thought I was just getting paranoid. However, he stopped and waited by the gate to the apartment building. I started to think he had seen me before and knew the route I was taking. When I reached the gate, he asked me if I had a boyfriend. I answered, "Yes, sorry, good evening," as polite as I can. He looked very angry, and I didn't want to say anything to provoke him. He proceeded to follow me, so I was walking slower. I was almost home, but I didn't want him to know that. I turned onto the pathway, heading to the lobby of my building, but I was still really anxious. I thought I'd put my keys in my coat pocket, but they were in my bag. I was shaking so much that it took multiple times to grab them. I managed to get them, and in a sudden rush, opened the magnetic door and shut it firmly behind me. The door closed, but the magnetic system didn't engage immediately. The man saw this, and he violently pushed it open, with such an angry expression. The door is made of glass, so I saw him from the other side. He looked very enraged. That's when I knew it was serious. Without even thinking, I screamed at the top of my voice. The man immediately ran to me and pushed me hard to the ground. I was stunned because I wasn't prepared for such a physical encounter. While he held on to me, I felt like I couldn't scream or even breathe. I think I was having a panic attack, and as far as I knew, nobody was coming, so I really thought the worst. I'm not very big for my age, and I knew the odds were not great when it comes to physical encounters. I'm not sure how much time passed, but I briefly lost consciousness. When I opened my eyes again, the man was gone, and the caretaker's wife was beside me. The caretaker chased after the man, but he managed to escape. The caretaker returned and called the police, but the man was caught within 10 minutes thanks to their description. I really don't know why he did that to me, or what his intention was. He didn't steal my bag, which would have been easy. I could never thank my caretaker enough for his help that night. He was the only one who came to my aid. The rest of the residents later admitted to the police that they heard the scream but didn't do anything. The man is now in jail. He denied everything. However, my statement, along with the caretaker's testimony and the CCTV evidence, was enough to secure a verdict. Since that incident, I've avoided using the tramway at night.